This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by the Virginia Education Association. An investment in teachers today will pay dividends tomorrow. Dignity Memorial. The Dignity Network provides professional and compassionate funeral, memorial, cremation, and cemetery services throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. Virginia Hospital and Healthcare Association for jobs, the economy, and public health, committed to advancing health and economic opportunity for all Virginians. Virginia Tourism Corporation, promoting why Virginia is for lovers of wine and craft beers, the outdoors, beaches, history, music, and more. Fall in love with Virginia at virginia.org. Additional support provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and a very special welcome to Congressman Donald McEachin. Very much appreciate your being here. Folks who know something about your career know that it's been almost 25 years of public service. It's going back to...
Don't tell anybody that.
When you were a youngster, and a very youngster, and starting out in the House of Delegates, 1995, the Senate of Virginia, now in your second term representing the 4th Congressional District in Congress, and very much appreciate your taking some time here the end of July. I'll tell our viewers we're having a conversation on July 29th. They'll be seeing the show here in Richmond this coming Sunday. When they see it, it will be early August, and a time that you've got a busy time back in the district.
Yes.
And meeting with your constituents and reading something about on your website that you're going to be here, there, and yonder during this time.
Yeah, it's a great time to be out and about and make sure that we're connecting with our constituents and make sure they understand what's going on in Washington. So I'm looking forward to it.
And we really want to talk about some of the key issues that you're working on. And certainly if I started off with environmental justice issues that you're working on, tell us some about that, and then we'll talk about any number of other issues as time permits.
Well, environmental justice is just the notion that we need to be inclusive as we craft our environmental policy. Historically, there have been groups that have been left out, low income, people of color, but they still have to live with the consequences of whatever environmental decisions are made. And so Congressman Grijalva, who is chair of the Natural Resources Committee, and I have gotten together and we've convened a group of what we call EJ proponents, environmental justice proponents, and we're having them give us input into not only a set of principles for environmental justice, but also some potential legislation.
Well, that will be a nice turn of events to get that focus, and that's one of the committees I think you serve on.
Yes, I'm fortunate enough to serve on Natural Resources, the Special Committee on Climate Change, and of course Energy and Commerce.
Yes. Well, what about defending the Coast Act? That probably relates somewhat to what you were saying, but that's another focus that you have.
Absolutely. That is a bill that we have filed along with our colleague Elaine Loria from the 2nd Congressional District. And what it does is it prohibits offshore drilling off the Virginia coast, as well as some other mid-Atlantic states. As you know, we have valuable naval assets in that area. They need to have room to train. They need to have room to operate, and oil rigs would prevent that. And also, we cannot afford a spill. We have 90,000 jobs at risk in just the Virginia Beach 2nd Congressional District area, if you will, that would be at risk if we had an oil spill. Tourism would be crushed, and that's not something that Virginia can afford. We need to have offshore wind out there, which is coming, and get some solar panels inside the state, and that's the direction we need to go.
And your district kind of goes right up against that district.
It does.
As you come So you probably have people whom you represent who work over there in that tourism area.
Absolutely. I go down to Chesapeake, parts of Chesapeake and parts of Suffolk, and we certainly do have constituents that work all over the Hampton Roads area.
Yes. Well, I saw something too about robocalls.
Yes.
When I was on your site. In fact, we're going to put the address up quite a few times during the show that people can go on your congressional webpage and find what we're talking about, and then as they look, they'll find out what's coming next too when you post it. But robocalls, we seem to get them whether they're on our cell phones now,
Absolutely,
our home
we do.
phones.
It was interesting doing the hearings that we had on robocalls, and that was in Energy and Commerce. A couple of members actually got robocalls during the course of the
did?
hearing. So they are perplexing, they are a problem, but we were able to craft a bill with our Republican colleagues. It ended up passing with over 400 votes and only 435 of us in the House. So it was overwhelmingly bipartisan to trim back these robocalls and to prevent them, to give people an opportunity to directly have a conversation with their phone carrier about what numbers they want to have come in and what numbers they don't want to have come in, and to be able to block things accordingly. So at no additional charge. So we're excited to see that bill go to the Senate and hopefully go to the President's desk.
Well, you mentioned going to the Senate, so I've got to pause in the list of all the issues that you've been working on. It seems like that many things land over in the Senate these days and don't even come up for a vote. Is this one you're hopeful will actually get a vote in the Senate?
Well, I am. Unfortunately, Mitch McConnell has blocked any number of good pieces of legislation that have come out of the House. And he's blocking them on a purely partisan basis, and he's not offering alternatives. For instance, the whole notion of election security. As you know, my colleague Senator Warner came to the floor right after the Mueller testimony and tried to put forward a bill on election security, which should be bipartisan. There should be no argument about election security. We know the Russians are trying to meddle with the 2020 elections. We should be preparing ourselves in the appropriate manner, and yet McConnell and his allies blocked that bill from coming forward. So that's wrong. But here with robocalls, we had over 400 members of the House vote for it. I think he'll be hard-pressed not to bring it forward.
It would appear, too, that the leadership in the Senate, the majority leader and others, would be hard-pressed not to do something about election security. I was hearing on NPR some discussion today from members of Congress talking about Republicans and Democrats who maybe had slightly different perspectives on doing something, but who all thought that something should happen.
Absolutely. Senator Cotton has, who is as Republican as they come, has put forward a bill on election security, and that hasn't come to the floor. It's Senator McConnell's intent, apparently, to continue to block these efforts. I believe that he sincerely believes that Donald Trump doesn't stand a chance of winning re-election without the help of the Russians. That is the only rational explanation for not putting a bill forward. It doesn't have to be my bill, it doesn't have to be a Democratic bill, but there should be some bill put forward to talk about election security, and he has refused to do so.
Yeah, fortunate, as you know, here in the Commonwealth, we have the paper ballots.
ballots.
But when Senator Warner was on recently, without naming all the states, I think he mentioned about 11 states that in some parts of the 11 states at least, there's no paper ballot backup.
Right, and what we have found is sometimes old-fashioned ways of doing things are the best ways, and certainly paper ballots, whether they're either the primary ballot or the backup ballot, is certainly something that's needed in this 21st century of ours to combat foreign meddling in our elections.
Well, as you well know, as one, although your birthplace was Germany when your father was in the Army, I mean, we think of you as a Richmond native in school here, that we have elections every year here in the Commonwealth, and there, I guess, could be reason to be concerned about state elections even, that there could be some experimental type of interference that would be tried, and I'm glad we have the paper backup.
Absolutely, you just don't know what exactly the Russians will do next. So I too am glad we have the paper ballot. And by the way, I've been able to trace my family back to just shortly after the Revolutionary War. So even though I wasn't physically born in Richmond, I am a Richmonder by all definitions.
Yes. All the way back to the Revolutionary.
just after the
Just
Revolutionary
after.
War.
Oh, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
That is. That really is.
Thank goodness for Ancestry.com.
Yes, yes. It really helps immediately. Well, now another issue, I think maybe that the ADA civil rights law, looking at it again, particularly as it relates to small businesses, that seems like another one of your initiatives.
Right. We put forward a bill with one of our colleagues from Rhode Island. And what that bill does is to try to assist small businesses in handling the cost and the challenges that they face in keeping up with the ADA. The ADA is certainly a worthwhile law. It's a good law, but it can put certain financial burdens on companies, and we want to make sure that we help them address those burdens as they comply with the law.
And I think that, among other things, it would just maybe increase the number of tax credits or
Exactly.
something that small businesses could have access to help defray at least some of the costs that they would have.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And is that one that you're optimistic it will have some bipartisan support over in the House?
Well, we hope so. We'll have to see. That one's just getting started
Yes.
on the legislative train, so we don't know what the future holds. I'm the eternal optimist, so if you ask me to look into my crystal ball, everything is going to pass, but we'll see what happens.
Now, you're talking about on the legislative train. I got to ask you to reflect some about your years here in the General Assembly, in which things would sometimes move so quickly that you needed to make sure you'd read everything that was in the bill. And in contrast, they move at a different pace. How are you finding the difference in the pace that when you were in the state Senate and now in the U.S. Congress?
Clearly there's a different pace, but I don't want your viewers or my constituents to think that in Congress we're not working hard, because we have meetings every day, we have hearings every day. But if you think about it for a moment, the principal difference is Virginia is one state. The Congress deals with 50 states and its territories, in the country's territories. And so it has to be more deliberative than what we do in Virginia, because there are more concerns to be taken care of. Just as a for instance, the folks who represent Nevada will tell you in a New York Minute that a lot of their state is owned by the federal government, which obviously puts certain pressure on their tax base, which is why they come out in favor of certain proposals that I just can't even begin to accept. And that's how different our country can be at times. And so we are a little bit slower, but we're more deliberative because we have more issues and more concerns to try to compromise.
Now, you mentioned territory, so I really want to ask you, there's no real representation in the sense for District of Columbia or for Puerto Rico. Do you have a perspective on whether they should really have voting members and be states that would get to help elect presidents?
I think they should have, absolutely, they should be states, and they should have full representation in the Congress. What some people don't understand is that their delegates, that is the ones from D.C. and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, do get to vote in committee, and they do get to vote on the House floor when we're in a committee of the whole versus final passage. So they have some voting rights, but not nearly enough. They are taxed like the rest of us are. Their young people are expected to serve in the military if they choose to. They have all the responsibilities of being an American, but they don't have all the rights of being an American, and we need to fix that.
Some have speculated that if Puerto Rico had been a state, they might have gotten more aid than they did in dealing with the rebuilding that's taken place there. Maybe so, maybe not, but being a territory, they did seem to get a short shift of it.
Well, they clearly got the short shift, but that's because of the President of the United States. In the past, I don't recall, I didn't serve in Congress during those bygone years, but in the past, I don't recall Washington, D.C. or Puerto Rico or any of the other territories really complaining about disaster relief and that they were getting the short shrift. This is solely rests with the President.
Healthcare cost. I think you and many of your colleagues have been interested in lowering healthcare costs, whether it's prescription drugs or whether it's healthcare. if you could wave your magic wand with your optimism that you have, what needs to be done?
Well, I personally favor a plan that we call Medicare X. Some people call it the public option. Last year, when I had the pleasure of running with Tim Kaine, as he ran for re-election to the Senate and I ran for re-election to the House, we put forward that plan which allows folks to buy into Medicare, at a certain age. And that does two things. Typically, those people are going to be older than the general population. So that makes the general population younger, which makes that insurance more affordable and cheaper. And at the same time, they tend to be younger than the folks already in Medicare,
Right.
which makes that population healthier and helps hold down costs. So that's just one method. Obviously, we need to tackle drug prices. In Energy and Commerce, we're working on that right now. And hopefully we'll have a bill put forward before the end of the year.
You know, the national debate that's going on, at least on the Democratic side among candidates, having to do with private insurance. Where do you come down on that? Do you think it should be still an option or not?
Well, that's the beauty of Medicare X, or the public option, is that you don't have to join Medicare if you don't want to.
Right.
You know, if you want to keep your private insurance, you absolutely have that option to do so. If you want to buy into Medicare, then you have that option. And so, you know, I can't imagine, I know very few of my constituents who want to be forced to give up
Right.
their commercial insurance. They may want to, which is certainly an option they should have, but I don't know many that want to voluntarily do it.
Switch over to wages. How long has it been since the minimum wage has been increased?
I think it's been at least a decade. And of course, we raised it to $15 an hour. At least the House passed a bill to do that, but it's graduated. So it doesn't jump to $15 an hour next year. It would gradually go up to $15 an hour, and I believe the target date's 2024.
And that, again, is another piece of legislation that's over in that other body, as some would say, or in the
Now,
Senate.
I'm afraid that one's going to die a slow death because I don't see Senator McConnell moving that bill forward, unfortunately.
What about, I mentioned several, but what about some other maybe initiatives that you're working on, legislative ones? What else would you want to mention?
Well, the big one that we're working on that hopefully we'll have filed by the fall is 100% clean energy by 2050. I've been fortunate enough to have leadership allow me to take the lead on that bill. It is a huge priority for the Democratic caucus. It's a huge priority for the Energy and Commerce Committee. And again, I think it is so necessary that we do this by 2050. All the experts have told us that that's an inflection point. If we don't get our act together by then, we're going to have serious problems on this planet for our children and their children. It will obviously have intermediate goals as we go along the path, but at the end of the day, the goal is to get us to be carbon free by 2050, at least in terms of the energy that we use.
You know, there obviously will be pushback on that and opposition. Let me take the opposite side and ask you, is that soon enough? Or should it happen in 2040? Or is from your analysis and your colleagues, if it can happen by then, is that soon enough, as some would say, to save the planet?
Yes, it is. You know, clearly all the scientists that we've had come before the committee tell us that 2050 is the absolute drop dead date. And again, the bill doesn't just wait till 2050 to get it all done.
Right.
The bill moves us along a continuum until we get to 2050. You know, there's certainly colleagues of mine who want to do this by 2030, 2040. I want to do it tomorrow.
Yes.
But it's just not, possible to reinvent our economy in such a short period of time.
What's your analysis and your understanding of other major countries in the world? Sometimes I get the impression that we're behind some in doing it, and other times I get the impression that we're not behind, that others that are as much of polluters, if I could use that word, as we are. Because that's going to take a global initiative, isn't it, to really work, because if only the U.S. did it and nobody else did.
No, that's absolutely the argument that you hear, but the reality is that the U.S. has always been a leader, and our innovation and our creativity is one of the reasons why. And as we create these technologies to do this massive re-engineering of our economy by 2050, we'll be able to share that with the rest of the planet, and they will. We absolutely believe they will come along. Yes, we are behind some countries, most notably some Northern European countries, and we're ahead of some countries like China and India. But without our leadership, it's not going to happen.
Right. Well, I'm sure some of your trips, you're on Interstate 95, and I was on it recently. Took an hour longer than I thought it was going to take, getting from Richmond to D.C. As we move toward energy efficiency and even among our automobiles, we've got a challenge that you and your colleagues at the federal level, as well as those around the states, will have to come up with the funding for transportation from something more than just the gas tax.
Absolutely. And what you're really touching on is infrastructure. We've got to make a move to electric vehicles, which means we have to be able to get charging stations up and running across the United States. And we can't do that without a solid infrastructure plan. And that's just one aspect of infrastructure. I'm not saying that's
Right.
all there is, but that's just one aspect that sort of touches on your question. And yes, we're going to have to move to something other than a gas tax because as cars become more efficient, as we start to use other modalities, that tax revenue is going to decline, and we'll have to come up with something else, whether it's a per mileage tax or something of that nature.
In addition to American University and University of Virginia that can claim you as their graduates, most of your constituents know, and we want all of our viewers to know, that you also have a Master's of Divinity from Virginia Union University.
Yes.
And I'm among those who've had the opportunity to hear you preach. Do you still get that opportunity in your busy schedule to fill in occasionally in a pulpit?
I actually did so yesterday down in Suffolk.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to preach to a Men's Day service at Diamond Grove Baptist Church in
Diamond
Suffolk,
Grove.
Virginia.
Yes. Well, I'm sure they enjoyed it.
They were very polite.
Yeah, right. Well, they very much enjoyed it at Grace Baptist Church, too, when you were here in Richmond and preached. What's your perspective on this congressional session? So much of the media news is focused on hearings that pertain to the president. That's not all that's happening, because you've talked about
Right.
legislation that's occurring, but if you here, as you're taking your August time to be among your constituents that you represent, and if they ask you, Congressman McEachin, how's it going this session of Congress, what will you be telling them?
Well, I'll be sharing with them a lot of what we've spoken about. I'll be sharing with them the joys and the successes that we've had, as well as the disappointments that we've had as bills go over to the Senate and just sort of die a quiet death. But the most important thing I want to impress upon my constituents is that in the House we can chew gum and walk at the same time. To listen to the media is an either-or choice. Either we dealing with impeachment or we're dealing with legislation. We can't do both oversight and legislation, and yet that's exactly what we're doing, oversight and legislation. But you wouldn't know that because every time we get in front of at least the D.C. media and the talking heads, they want to talk about either impeachment or oversight. They don't want to talk about the legislation that we're passing.
Now, I don't know, will they be asking you about your endorsements of presidential candidates? Because I think you, to my knowledge, only 2 of our members of Congress have come out with endorsements, and I believe you were the first.
No, I think Don Beyer was the first.
Oh, he was the first,
Yeah.
You were the second. Well, he's a good person to be second to. And if they ask you, Congressman McEachin, how come you endorsed Joe Biden? What's your answer for them?
Well, I believe that Vice President Biden has the experience to really rescue the soul of this country. He's got the global reputation to bring us back to where we need to be as a superpower and as an influencer of what happens around the world, as well as to bring dignity back to the presidency here. Yes, there are differences among the Democratic candidates, but what we're really talking about is shades of blue. We're not talking about radical differences, although they will ultimately end up trying to portray them as radical. But at the end of the day, experience matters. having been President Obama's vice president for 8 years, worked at his elbow, helped him with his policies. He understands how the White House works. He understands how the world works. And Lord knows he understands how Congress works. He's the perfect candidate to rescue the soul of this country.
Congressman McEachin, we thank you so much for stopping by this week in Richmond and being on our show, and we wish you a great month of August, and then as you return refreshed by your constituency back in September, back to the District of Columbia. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by the Virginia Education Association. An investment in teachers today will pay dividends tomorrow. Dignity Memorial. The Dignity Network provides professional and compassionate funeral, memorial, cremation, and cemetery services throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. Virginia Hospital and Healthcare Association for jobs, the economy, and public health. Virginia Tourism Corporation, promoting why Virginia is for lovers, lovers of wine and craft beers, the outdoors, beaches, history, music, and more. Fall in love with Virginia at virginia.org. Additional support provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.